I am Albert Einstein. What the world sees as a joke was, in truth, my silent declaration of war. They call it my most famous portrait. More iconic than any Nobel Prize photograph, more recognizable than any lecture hall blackboard filled with my scribbles. It is not a picture of thought, but of reaction, a reflex. And like all true reflexes, it bypassed the careful circuits of the mind and spoke directly from the spirit. You see the tongue, the wild hair, the eyes crinkled in what you assume is mirth. But let me tell you about the gravity that bent that moment into existence. Let me tell you what that tongue was truly tasting. The date was March 14th, 1951, my 72nd birthday. The celebrations at the Princeton Club had been a generous, warm-hearted affair, a cage of good intentions. But as I settled into the back of the car, a profound weariness settled with me. It was not the weariness of age, but of performance. All evening, the photographers had orbited, their flashbulbs erupting like tiny artificial stars. "Professor," a smile. "Look here, just one more." They sought an icon, a fossilized symbol of genius. They wanted to capture a face, but what they demanded was a mask. And then, as the car door remained open, Arthur Sass of the press thrust his lens at me once more. It was the final request in a long chorus of demands. In that instant, calculations ceased. I did not decide. I simply responded. To the endless siege of the camera, to the expectation of dignified performance, my body offered its own pure, unedited conclusion. I stuck out my tongue, the flash popped. The world went white for a fraction of a second. And when the afterimage faded, I felt a surge of something remarkably like relief. When I saw the print, I laughed, a genuine deep laugh from the chest. Finally, a photograph that told the truth. Not the truth of theorems, but the truth of a moment. The truth of a man saying, "Enough." I immediately ordered 9 copies. This was an image I wished to disseminate myself. To my friend, the newsman Howard K. Smith, I sent one with an inscription. I wrote, in our native German, "This gesture you will like because it is aimed at all of humanity. A civilian can afford to do what no diplomat would dare." To my confidant Johanna Fantova, I was even more direct. The outstretched tongue reflects my political views. People have often wondered at those notes. They see a playful picture and assume the words are part of the joke. They could not be more mistaken. The tongue was the joke. The meaning behind it was my solemn creed. To understand it, you must understand the atmosphere I was breathing in 1951, America. My refuge from the Nazi plague was now sick with a different fever, McCarthyism. A politics of fear, whispered in committee rooms. A culture where thought itself could be subpoenaed. Where advocating for civil rights, for a world free of the nuclear terror I had inadvertently helped unleash, for a socialism that sought only to feed the hungry, these were not philosophies. In the files of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, they were indices of subversion. Yes, the FB, I had a file on me. It was opened in 1932, long before I was a citizen, and it grew like a malignant creature fed on paranoia. By the time I left this world, it was 1,427 pages long. Imagine it. 1,400 pages documenting the dangerous ideas of a physicist. Congressman John Rankin stood in the House and declared I ought to be prosecuted. My crime? I believed in the equality of Black Americans. I believed the atom bomb was a turning point for mankind's conscience, not just its weaponry. I believed the hungry child was a greater threat to security than any political ideology. So, in that context, consider my gesture in the car. It was not a prank aimed at a photographer. It was a deliberate, insolent raspberry blown at the entire edifice of McCarthyite authority. A diplomat is a servant of power. He must measure, dissemble, and smile when he is sick inside. But a civilian? A scientist whose only loyalty is to the observed truth. He can afford a moment of perfect, childish honesty, He can look into the eye of power, whether it is a camera lens or a government committee, and defy its command for a solemn, compliant mask. This was a lesson I had learned in blood and fire. In Germany, they had not just persecuted me. They had persecuted my life's work. They called relativity, Jewish physics, a perversion. They sought to bend the very laws of the universe to their racial madness. When you have seen truth itself declared an enemy of the state, you develop a profound skepticism of all state-sanctioned seriousness. My silly face was a shield. Behind it, my mind remained unassailable. They could investigate my friends, as they did to my dear colleague, Robert Oppenheimer. But they could not subpoena a thought in my head. The photograph became famous in its cropped version, just my face isolated against the void. The original showed me sitting between friends, Frank Adelot and his wife, Marie. But history, like propaganda, prefers its symbols alone. They cut out the context, the community. They left only the icon and its defiant gesture. In a way, this distortion served my purpose. It amplified the statement. The public, thankfully, embraced the image for its humanity. They saw the man behind the monument, and they were right to rejoice in that. But the laughter it evokes contains a subtle, powerful truth they might not fully grasp. Every chuckle at that picture is a small victory over the forces that wanted my face and every thinking person's face to be frozen in fear, respect, and obedience. You ask about my politics? They are simple. I was for the oppressed against the oppressor, for curiosity against dogma, for peace against the machinery of war. That tongue was the simplest expression of that politics, a refusal. A refusal to perform gravity for a world that had become tragically grave. A refusal to grant my image to the project of fear. I once wrote, as a young man, that unthinking respect for authority is the greatest enemy of truth. For 50 years, I watched that principle be tested, violated, and vindicated on the world stage. On my 72nd birthday, sitting in a car in New Jersey, I finally found a way to illustrate it without a single word. It was not an equation, but it was, in its own way, perfectly elegant. A gesture of flesh and spirit, proving that even under the weight of age, history, and the surveillance state, the human soul can still choose to be, gloriously and defiantly, unserious, and in that choice lies its most serious power.